For the policy session, I would like to introduce Giulia Forgnone, and she's the Director of Public Affairs and Communications. She joined EAA in September 2022, and she has a wide range of experience in the EU climate and energy fields, so a very relevant and highly experienced host. Thank you very much.
I don't need it.
Okay.
Thank you, Anna, for the introduction, and welcome everyone to the first session of today's event, Driving Sustainability, a policy dialogue on challenges and opportunity in expanding recycled aluminium in electric vehicles. This debate couldn't have come at a better time, I'd say. The raw materials agenda, as you know, is a hot topic here in Brussels, and so is the future of mobility. Often, though, when we talk about raw materials and the future of mobility, electric vehicles, we talk about batteries all the time. But this is just a small part of the bigger picture. And today, with this debate, we want to deep dive into the aluminium alloy world, such as magnesium and silicon, discussing the challenges regarding the security of supply, and also what's the key role of recycling in all this. And we're going to do that from a policy point of view. In particular, we want to discuss two key pieces of legislation, the Critical Raw Materials Act, which, by the way, was just adopted 3 days ago, and the proposal on the end-of-life vehicles directive. And we aim at debating two main things. Next slide, maybe. Yes. First, how can we ensure a stable security of supply of those raw materials that are key to produce electric vehicles here in Europe? And second, how current and upcoming pieces of legislation can help advance recycling practices, ensuring that end-of-life materials remain and are repurposed in Europe. And how are we going to do that? First, we're going to start with a keynote speech by a Commission representative, and a little disclaimer here, because we were expecting Mattia Pellegrini today, but he's not going to make it. However, we are lucky enough to have Gaël de Rotalier with us, so thank you for making it in such a short notice, who is going to provide us with an overview of what the Commission's been doing so far to secure a robust raw material value chain here in Europe while enhancing recycling. Then I'm going to ask my panelists to join me on stage to further debate on that. And then it will be your turn to ask questions. So start thinking about them while we're debating, and hopefully there will be time for everyone to raise their hands and ask their question. So now, without further ado, I would invite Gaël to join me on stage. Let's welcome him with a big round of applause, please, everyone. So Gaël is Policy Officer in the Waste Resource Unit in DG Environment. And Gaël, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation. And as well for giving me the opportunity to make the link indeed between what we are doing in the Commission in the more policy side with what is being done under the research industry innovation side on this very important topical issue of circularity, decarbonization, and how this can be translated into the automotive sector. So as you said, I'm working in the environment in the team which has been really working on the revision of the end-of-life vehicle directive. So I'm going to be speaking a bit more on that than on the CRM Act, but of course, if there are also questions on that, I'm also happy to chip in on that. But just to say a bit how we are seeing is this issue of circularity and raw material and increased recycling rates in the automotive sector from our perspective in the Commission, our perspective being the regulatory leverage. I mean, we are very interested, of course, to have the perspective of the research, which is what the SALEMA project is about, and very important for us. We are also coming from the regulatory side, and of course, it's always very important to see how the two sides bridge. Well, specifically because when we are, as sort of regulator policymakers, developing our thinking about what could be improved and what we could do as a regulator, while not interfering too much with the business, the market, then people are telling us often, these things, yeah, ideally could be done, but it's not possible today. It doesn't work. And then we're talking to different stakeholders and different views. And then when you have a project which is exactly looking at increasing recycling, not just the quantity, but the quality, improving the segregation of scrap, improving how you can better have a higher quality of aluminium scraps, segregate the alloys, etc., etc. This is very important because that supports what we want to see achieved and what we could also push forward as regulators. So as a starting point for us in this revision of the ELV legislation was, well, first, the current ELV legislation dates back from the 2000s. And if you read it again, it's very short and it's very interesting, actually. There's a lot of very looking forward ideas on recycled content, on design for recycling. But these are provisions which are very vague and general, and they have not really brought forward a lot. They have not had a lot of impact. On the other hand, there were a few very more concrete provisions on recycling targets by weight, on the presence of hazardous substances in new cars, in the design. And this really, and on the collection, and this had a clear impact. But I think this was legislation from 2000, and now we are 20 years afterwards, and many things have moved on the political agenda in ferrocircularity, notably looking more upstream, and also, moving to a really circular business overall, not just looking at how you can collect and dismantle the car and not really caring so much about what's happening afterwards. So that's a bit the starting point from a regulatory point of view. And then, of course, the other starting point was to see the evolution in the automotive sector compared to, in the last years, and I mean, you know that better than me, electrifications, decarbonization, use of lightweight materials like aluminium and its alloys, of plastics, of electronics. And these are all very valuable materials. And the current situation, when you look at how cars are dismantled and recycled, that a lot of this very valuable material is not properly retained or valued at the end of life of the car. The dismantling remains pretty basic in many instances. Then you go to the shredders, and a lot of this materials is exported, as you know, outside the EU, and it's further used and recycled there. So there is also here a need for improving the whole supply chain. And this is what we've been trying to do with the proposal on the ELV regulation, which was really to look into all the bottlenecks along all the supply chain. So at the collection side first, where we know a lot of cars still disappear from the statistics. This is what we call the famous missing vehicles issue. So being much stricter on this point, on enforcement, on the export of used car as well. And that's a completely new element. I mean, you will not find that anywhere else in the world. Proposal to regulate the export of what is not waste, but what is a used vehicle. And also traceability with the authorized treatment facilities, the shredders, etc., etc. So that's the first point on collection, and we think there is a great potential of dismantling many more vehicles in the EU, and that also means keeping the materials in there and dismantling it in the EU. So, and then the second step is a treatment, and as I've said, I think while we have this 85% objective of recycling by weight, which is met, then we have an issue with the quality of what comes out of the dismantling and the shredders, and there is a lot of potential for increasing indeed this quality and the recycling process, and I think this is what this project is about, but this is what we are also seeing in other areas where there is a lot of project and progress in getting higher quality scrap so that this can really be used again in the supply chain by the EU industry to produce, to get into the smelters and then produce aluminium or steel, for example, of a quality which is required for the automotive industry. But that also means that the automotive industry itself has to look into that from a design point of view, and that's also a part of the proposal that we've put together. And on that one, we've also worked together in DG Environment with other colleagues in other DGs, notably DG Grow, who is working on the automotive unit on the type approval stage, so that also at the design point, there is a better recognition of the need for recyclability at the end of the life of a car. And that's why we have also put forward a number of proposals on the design side to make sure that the automotive sector gets an interest in that. And I think with the automotive, with the electrification, they also have an interest in, and we are seeing that in keeping an eye and keeping some follow-up or some even sometimes a control of how these precious materials can be reused at the end of the process. So that's what we've put under the design and quality of materials which can come out of the recycling process. And then we also have the part on the recycled content. So that's, I mean, I've been talking mostly about what can come out as a supply of higher quality materials and scrap from the treatment of ELV. But then often when we talk to dismantlers, recyclers say, well, we can produce technically, if we have the means, if we have the resources, if we have the technology, we can produce a good quality scrap, aluminium, steel, or other materials. But if there's no market for it, we're not going to do that. It's not going to be profitable, and that's why we need as well the suppliers of the automotive sector itself, to also get engaged, and so that there is not just a push from the demand side, but also a pull from the supply side, or rather the opposite, so that then from the demand side that there is also an interest to engage and take on these recycled materials. And that's where we have also come forward with proposals on recycled content, and mandatory recycled content for plastics. Of course, not the subject of today's discussion, but this is what has been, this is what the Commission has proposed, that there should be 25% of recycled plastics in new cars. And we have quite a lot of debates on that one at the moment with all stakeholders. But we have also put forward a possibility, so there is nothing decided there, but a possibility to also move for recycled content targets for in the automotive sector for aluminium or magnesium. And that's, we have not set any target there, but we have proposed that indeed this issue being could be further assessed and studied in the coming years to see indeed if there is a case for it, looking at all the factors that needs to be checked to make sure that indeed this would help bringing up higher recycled content for aluminium and other products in new cars. So that's a very short summary of what we have been trying to do when we came up with a proposal in the Commission for this new regulation on end-of-life vehicles. Also, yeah, moving from a directive to regulation. That was a call by many stakeholders that we need to be to get to a higher degree of harmonization and level playing field. Now, the proposal was tabled in July last year. It is going slowly through the process of the legislative process. We are discussing it now with the member states in the Council. In the Parliament, I think they will, a rapporteur has been appointed, but well, he has been considering that first we need to go through the elections, and then if he's re-elected, then he would continue the work on that. But I think there is an interest, broadly speaking, from the member states, from the parliament, from stakeholders. Of course, a lot of discussion on the detail, on to which degree we should go. But I think the debate is there, and I'm happy that a project like this one can also contribute to this debate, because this is really what we need to show what can be done in practice, and what we have preached, what we have proposed, I mean, reflects the reality. And of course, how this also contributes to the critical raw material overall policy to secure more recycling in the EU, more supply as well from materials in the EU. So we think it's a very important contributions to moving to circularity in a very important sector with the automotive sector. So we're looking forward to good discussions on this today from all the stakeholders, and looking forward as well to comments and input along the whole legislative process, so that we can get to a good outcome in the coming years on that. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Gaël. Thank you, Gaël, for having laid a solid foundation for the debate moving forward. I now would like to invite our panelists to join me on stage. And today, so let's welcome them, come on. Panelists, join me on stage. Today we have with us Martin Tauber, who is the European representative for the International Magnesium Association, and also president of the Critical Raw Materials Alliance. Then we have Chris Heron, Director of Public Affairs and Communication at Eurometaux. And last but not least, Francesca Cavezza, Innovation Project Manager at European Aluminium. And Gaël, yes, please sit next to me, thank you. And thank you for also joining the debate. So, okay, are we all ready? Let's start. Martin, I would like to start with you. So the magnesium industry faced a massive crisis back in 2021. We can still see repercussion of it today, although things are slightly improving. And I would like you to reflect on what can we learn from this crisis in order for the same mistake not to be repeated in other critical and strategic raw material industry here in Europe. Could you elaborate a bit on that?
Good morning. Thank you for the question. You might ask yourself why I'm here, because the aim of the project SALEMA is to reduce or to eliminate critical raw materials as silica and magnesium. So we'll try to do my best to defend our industry in this room as well. But I think it's a fact that magnesium is the most used alloying element in all the aluminium alloys. So I think we have a kind of relationship and we can't do without each other. To your question on the crisis, indeed, we had the end of 21 a supply crisis which didn't last very long. And I think it's fair to say that it was not intended to harm the magnesium industry or the aluminium industry in any way. It was an energy regulation in China where they regulated the energy use of certain regions, and one region where obviously about 60% of the global magnesium is produced, they cut the energy for 4 to 5 weeks, and about 60% of the plants were shut down. It is a little bit difficult because when we see what we learned, when we had a crisis, we try to resolve it. When it's resolved, we try to forget it, to look to the next crisis. And if you ask, we had the debates with Chinese officials as well about that, and they say, oh, well, we are aware of that we assure you that in that magnitude it will not happen anymore. And it's difficult because if you see the export statistics, for instance, from this period, you see per quarter, you don't see any difference because all the production was resumed afterwards and they ramped up. And even in November 21, they shipped almost everything which was lost in the production the weeks before. So we have to be aware. We don't to forget that. What we have to learn, I think, is to set our European supply chains from every company, from every industry on a stress test from time to time to simulate that. I think also to be ready to don't look only on costs, also to look on resilience and on supply security. Include, also traders. Traders, I think they have brought the business into Europe and they are still strong, I think, and can support that. Look into different buffer stocks, what you could have at your company, at the harbors, at the traders. So I think it's, and the most important thing is that to incentivize such measures within your company. If you only look isolated into costs, you will forget the crisis if it's resolved very quickly. But if you incentivize a security of supply, then you could probably prevent it.
All right, thank you, Martin. And to continue the discussion on this, I would like to move to you, Chris. In today's volatile geopolitical landscape, how do policy measures such as the Critical Raw Materials Act contribute to mitigate the disruption of raw materials like silicon and magnesium? And also, what further action can be taken to bolster these efforts?
Thanks, Giulia. Pleasure to be here today as well. And the Critical Raw Materials Act is setting a clear direction of travel towards 2030. Europe wants to mine, process, and recycle more of its strategic raw materials here on home soil while diversifying its global supplies. And I think that's a very important and impactful political signal where we are today. We're in a very geopolitical world. It's been a difficult 2 years with many raw materials crises along the way since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. In the last year alone, China has imposed export restrictions on 4 different critical raw materials supply chains: gallium, germanium, graphite, and rare earths equipment. The magnesium crisis is almost a distant memory because of all of these shocks which have happened in the meantime. The Critical Raw Materials Act has some important provisions to improve the permitting rules for local projects, deadlines which should make sure that we in Europe can bring projects online faster than we could before. That removes one very important bottleneck for us as a sector, but I don't think it addresses some of the challenges that Martin was speaking about and we see for the other commodities. So I think for me, it's going to be very important and interesting to see what wider signal that Act will now send when it comes to the policy making that comes in all areas from the next Commission. And then 2 key challenges which still need to be tackled there. Firstly, Europe has some very problematic dependencies on single suppliers like China. Magnesium is a good example where 93% or so forth is coming from China still. There are a number of other examples where we have that single supply source, which causes us a lot of vulnerability, and we don't know what problems are around the horizon. But the second is more of a valuing, hopefully, of the existing capacity we have in Europe today for strategic raw materials, which maybe has been undervalued in discussions previously. I could talk here about aluminium and its manifold uses across the energy transition, but silicon is equally true here. We do make silicon here in Europe today across many facilities. We're only able to do so because we have trade defense measures in place historically. China's overcapacity for silicon is able to supply the world 2 times over for the silicon it needs. So the production we have in Europe for this very important material for aluminium, for batteries, for solar, is in a very precarious place, always. And the energy crisis has made that all the more difficult too. 63% of our silicon capacity is offline today as well. So hopefully we can see not just the rules we have on permitting, but actions to address these other areas too. And then 3 key things to close with about what needs to happen there. Firstly, improve the business case for these operations through reducing the cost of energy, through keeping those trade measures in place, but also probably introducing market incentives for consumers in Europe to buy local and buy sustainable and be incentivized to do so. Secondly, to finance projects more. The Critical Raw Materials Act doesn't have finance attached. If we want to bring magnesium or silicon projects newly off the ground, we will need some finance there to de-risk the capital and help with the OPEX as well. And then lastly, we need to recycle everything we can, which is where things like the ELV directive are so important. As Europe, we can't control the primary supply chains we have and the geopolitical turbulences they have, but we can control what we do with the scrap we generate and create, and making the best use of the alloys for aluminium, for example, making sure the silicon, the magnesium is going through in the right loops to the right products is absolutely a crucial part of that equation too. So Critical Raw Materials Act, great first step, but hopefully we can see those actions, business case, finance, and recycling.
Thank you very much, Chris, for this very comprehensive overview, highlighting challenges but also potential solutions that some already on the table, some not. Now I would like to move to Francesca. How does a project like SALEMA fit into all of this? And also, if you could first provide an overview of the project, because not everyone probably is aware of what it's about, but also if you could link it to the connection of the 2 policy initiatives that we are discussing today.
So thank you. First of all, I will briefly introduce SALEMA. You will have, during the day, a lot of more detailed explanation of what SALEMA is about. But what may be obvious by now that SALEMA is about aluminium. It's about aluminium alloys, and it's about aluminium alloys used to make components in electric vehicles. So among the aluminium alloys, they were already mentioned, but magnesium and silicon are alloys that you will find in the vast majority of aluminium alloys. And the strategy of SALEMA is really to reduce dependency from these 2 primary critical raw materials, so magnesium and silicon, and it does it in 2 ways. From one side, by developing alloys which have a lower content of magnesium and silicon, but I will reassure both. we still have magnesium and silicon. Aluminium, we still need it for a very long time. And on the other side, to have components which are made with a higher amount of recycled aluminium, which means that these magnesium and silicon are not, let's say, freshly mined, but they're really recovered from end-of-life products. So this is a bit the overview of what is SALEMA. And then, of course, it was mentioned the most natural, let's say, legislation around SALEMA are the Critical Raw Material Act and End-of-Life Vehicle regulation. The Critical Raw Material Act, actually, SALEMA started before even it was announced, but that shows how relevant and important it is. As I mentioned before, yeah, we do need to be sure, like, we can try to reduce the amount of magnesium and silicon, but we will never get rid of that. So we really need to be sure that we have a supply of these two materials in Europe, and we need legislation such as the Critical Raw Material Act that makes sure that we still have this material. And the other side, we have the end-of-life vehicle regulation, and I think it's more and it's clearer and clearer, and we see it in the regulation as well that we are not recycling. It's not only collecting end-of-life product and reusing it. We are actually in the Museum of Cars. You can see cars that have been evolved during the years. It's not as easy as taking a door from a car that was produced 20 years ago, because that's what we have in the end-of-life vehicle that we have today, and put it in a new car. So it's really important to not only recycle, but to have the best recycled possible, which means that you have the best possible quality of the aluminium so that it can be reused in the best way possible, and it's really an integral part of the SALEMA project. And then another thing that I think it's important in this project is that recycle, but even more circularity, it cannot happen when only with one actor. It's really like a joint effort, and I think it's kind of reflected in SALEMA as well. It doesn't start when the product ends. It starts way before. It starts from design. It starts from design cars, which are easy to disassemble, which are easy to recycle, and it involves like every part of the value chain. And that's what SALEMA is doing as well.
Many thanks, Francesca. Now, Gaël, we heard about all our panelists, so I'd like to circle back to you. And my question to you is, do you believe that there are actionable steps that can be taken at the policy-making level? And also, how do you see the involvement of industry representative, other stakeholders, but also the key role of projects such as SALEMA contributing to all this?
Yes, I mean, so the actionable steps in terms of policy making, I think, well, I would say this is what the Commission has proposed on the ELV. I mean, this proposal is there for debate now. I think, yeah, we are really looked into all the steps that are involved in the well, dismantling, from design to dismantling until recycling, and check out what could be done by all the stakeholders in that respect. So I think this is really our attempt, and now this is why we are so keen to hear from the feedback from stakeholders. And I have to say, yeah, so far it's relatively positive, but the question for us really is, on this initiative, but also more generally speaking, it's to which extent we should go in details and regulating more the activities, or whether we should let it go and let the market forces drive the process. And that's always a tension that we are in. And we are very mindful of that as legislators. We don't want to regulate everything in detail, but at the same time, if we just remain general, then we see, well, the progress does not really happen as it could, and there is no harmonization. So that's a bit of a general statement, but that's really where we have tried to put the balance in our proposal. And notably, we are getting quite, if you look at I mean, you're discussing about treatment, how we can improve the quality of treatment of end-of-life vehicles. In the proposal that has been tabled by the Commission, there's quite a lot, some details about that. And some stakeholders are saying, well, this is not your role, you should not go into these details. But others are just saying, well, we need that element of details because otherwise it's not going to happen. And it's this, on these topics, this is where we would need the input of stakeholders and the different views and to see what is actually the best outcome. I'm taking this example, I can also talk about the recycled content, where we have put, I mean, of course this is for plastic, so less relevant than for our discussion today, but we have put this level directly in the legislation, and now there are a lot of pros and cons discussion on that. So this is really where we would like to hear from the stakeholders in the industry what they think is for them a desirable and feasible outcome, because that's really where we are always putting our attention and where we want to set the balance straight. So that would be, so to say, a short answer from my end. I just wanted to also say that we are also looking, there's been a lot of discussions about, well, contributing to an industrial basis in Europe, having more resources staying in the EU, from dismantling, building up capacity as well. I think this is also very important for us, of course. And I think policy-wise, I mean, in the environment, we've been really boosted by the Green Deal under this current Commission. We know the next Commission will also look very much at to the industrial policy, industrial deal. And for us, it is very important that they all go together. And circular economy, I mean, what best example do you have of a green and industrial deal? But I think it's very important for all stakeholders, also in the circular economy sector, to also bring that message to the policymakers. That would work with us in DG Environment, that's for sure. But I mean, when it comes also, because we've discussed a bit funding, the CRMAC doesn't have any financing attached. There are some, of course, as you know, EU financing mechanism, etc., etc. They would be ranked according to some priorities. And if you don't have circularity as one of the main issue in circular sectors, then you would miss a step. So I think this is all part of this discussion that is important to have when we look at the broader picture, to see how we can indeed move on the circularity area in the next years as well at the EU level, with all the leverage, so the regulatory, but also the financing and the research. And I think, yeah, the research project, the one that we have, is a good example of that. But if we want to look ahead, I think, yeah, the industrial bit, producing in Europe, is a very important slogan, I think, that would need to also be put forward as a priority in the next years.
All right, thank you, Gaël. Would any of you would like to comment on this point? Chris.
Yeah, I can just say that for recycling a lot of these critical raw materials from the end products, you have to go a step further than just the business as usual. And DG Environment Waste Unit can probably be praised for the approach they've taken, not just in the ELV directive, but also the batteries directive, before the CRM Act even came about, to really look on a material-specific, waste stream-specific basis on what the materials are and how you can extract them. The WE directive for the electronics waste is coming up next, and we'd hope to see the same. So I think because of their small volume, because of their value, and because a lot of recycling is taking place by the big stuff you can recycle, you really need this tailored approach to the critical materials. What's in an aluminium alloy, for example. So we are supportive that DG Environment is taking that step beyond just the business as usual.
Thank you, Chris. And also on recycling, maybe it's a point I'd like to make. As you know, we also have recycling benchmarks in the Critical Raw Materials Act, and actually, compared to the initial Commission proposal, now the percentage is higher. So we moved from 15 to 25. For me, though, what is not yet clear is really the effect that this is going to have here in Europe, because these are just benchmarks, not legally binding. They're even targeting the whole raw materials per se, not targeting one categories. So my question to you, it would be, and to you, all of you actually, are these enough? And also, what are we missing? And where is the link with also other policy initiatives, such as the end of vehicles directive proposal? Who would like to? Yeah, Martin.
Maybe I can comment on that. I mean, as a result of the before mentioned supply crisis end of 21, the Commission took a very, fast step to form a high-level ad hoc group on to bring back or to look into brownfield and greenfield magnesium production in Europe. And it was launched in March 22, and had similar targets like we find now in the Critical Raw Materials Act. So we had set them. Also, there was an involvement of all the associations as well, and the Commission set the target for 2030 to bring about 15% of the imports produced in Europe again, and we came up with a target figure strive a target figure for 40,000 tons by 2030. It was also said, and that's the link to the Critical Raw Materials Act, that this is kind of a guinea pig exercise for the Critical Raw Materials Act, because it's the same procedure. So there were local contact persons named in the member states. They were tasked to look into greenfield, brownfield projects with several loops for reporting back. And now we are in 24. This was launched in 22, and I'm disappointed to report that no brick was laid for a new production plan. So we are looking very relaxed in this Critical Raw Material Act policy. I think it's a very complicated and process, and now it's not only magnesium, because magnesium would have been very easy, but now it's for, I think, 17 strategic raw materials, and it's following the same procedure, and we have already the targets for 2030. We have announced with the council approving it. Now we have 26 to appoint this, to have the project pipeline and so on. So the problems won't stop, and this will take a very long time and a very complicated process.
Thank you, Martin. But at least we saw some progress, I would say.
Of course.
At least now we have like an act completely.
The awareness is always there. That's
Chris?
Yeah, the 25%, I have also more questions than answers, probably. We saw it was 15% and already had questions, and then the council and the MEPs decided to raise that, because that often happens when the institutions negotiate. But really, what does that mean in practice? And hopefully it will lead to a more granular analysis of each of these materials and where they stand today and what's needed to improve that recycling rate. But within that basket, you have such a variety. You have aluminium, which has over 45% recycling supply contribution today. Copper, it's 55%. Then you're down to the rare earths or the battery materials, which are 0 today, but will rise a lot when the scrap comes. And then things like magnesium or silicon, where they're in the alloys loop, but how do you calculate what there's recycled and what's not? So maybe it's a question to Gaël, if he has any view on what needs to come next to turn this one big number into something that's actionable and also linked indeed to all of the policy initiatives you're taking per waste stream.
Yes, well, this is a policy objective, and then this is helpful in mobilizing then the whole toolbox that we have at the EU level to get there. So that's why, indeed, as you've mentioned, again, I'm talking about legislation, but that's our core business, so to say. So we have been, indeed, in the Commission coming forward with the batteries example. This is a clear contribution on how to get not just objective, but the way to get there in terms of recycled content and recycling. Doing it now with the ELV proposal, and the we, as you mentioned, on e-waste, that's also coming up. So that's a way of putting everything under the umbrella of this objective of 25% recycling, and have that as a roadmap. I mean, at least for us as policymakers, to get there and see indeed how you can decline that in the different waste streams and different materials. I don't think there is just one way to do that and a magic solution. Indeed, the Commission had proposed 15%, so now it's 25%. We are taking good note of that, and we'll just be doing everything that we can. But I just wanted to come back to what I said before. I think this also should be helpful when you get to the broader EU objectives for the next Commission, and saying, okay, we have been saying that critical raw material has been very high on there. It will remain, that's no doubt, but then the recycling, circularity part of it should really be considered as a high priority in that respect. And if you have that, and if you have that in the CRM Act, and if you have that as part of the industrial policy objectives, then I think we would have much more leverage and means to get there than if we didn't have that. So I think this is how we would see it, and definitely for us it has been helpful as well. Just to give an example on our initiative on the ELV proposal, that was very, of course, when we discussed at the beginning of the revision, critical raw material was one part of it, but was not necessarily a dominant one. When we got to the end of the proposal, that was the main driver for the proposal, and the fact that also we need to have a higher value for these resources and try as much as possible, of course, with respecting the whole international trade agenda, but try to see what we can do best in the EU. So and when we are mentioning this proposal to policymakers which who do not really know about the details, they immediately realize that, well, what is happening today, where a lot of this scrap is exported outside the EU and not valorized in our house, despite their precious nature, that immediately spoke to them. So I think we have to build on that and then mobilize all the energies around this.
Yeah, and then maybe, indeed, we are talking about recycling that's a product related, and critical raw material is looking, of course, a bit step before. And I think what would be really important, and it's the step that has been already taken, is traceability eventually. So things like digital product passport, that, for example, in end-of-life vehicle, it's in a circularity passport, and that would really, I think, be one of the fundamental tools that can be used to be sure that when we're talking about recycling, we know what is being recycled, what can be recycled, and which kind of objective can be achieved. Because indeed, we are talking several materials that are very different. The recycling routes are completely different from one to another, and they are really product related.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Francesca. And actually, yeah, moving to the ELV, we published a study recently as European Aluminium that really look at the aluminium content in cars. And for me, I'm not an expert, I also study political science, by the way, but it was very interesting to see that in 2022, the content of aluminium per car were over 200 kilos. And over in less than 10 years, this is going to double of 25%, so 25% more of the kilos we have today in a car. So there's a lot of potential for me, what I was reading that, to really keep these recycled alloys here in Europe. But what I'm missing still is to see how can the ELV can really help, and especially now that we're moving towards, the election, there will be we know the parliament stopped working on it, and the discourse is a bit changing. How do you see this going?
Well, I mean, exactly what you said. I mean, there is more and more aluminium being used in cars. This will increase in the future. Most of the aluminium which is used in car today, it doesn't come from recycled aluminium. This is virgin materials, and this requires a lot of. I mean, these are alloys which requires very high quality. And when you talk to the automotive sector, they are saying, well, it's very difficult. I mean, we need this quality. It's not available when we look at the scrap and the recycled material. So we are not using it. I mean, and that has been the speech for a long time. I think now it's changing. I mean, for a number of reasons. One of them is also that they realize the decarbonization agenda is very important, and then using recycled materials is one of the best way to decarbonize your production. And also because of what we'll be discussing today. I mean, there is technological progress which shows that indeed you can get to a recycled material from ELV, which can be reused again in the automotive sector. But that has been one of the big bottlenecks from the automotive sector. They said, this is not available on the market, so we cannot use it. And then when you talk to the recyclers, they said, well, we can do it, but they don't want to buy it. And we've been, and this has been always our discussion, because we have been talking to different stakeholders, and they were all saying, we can do it, but the others are not moving on. They are not able to produce the quality that we want, or the ones which were saying we are able to produce it, but they don't want to buy it. And that's why we have been trying to come up with the right measures at each and every step, and notably with the automotive sector, saying that okay, if indeed the quality is there, if the material is available from recycling, then a way to make sure that they would use it would be to set this recycled content obligation for new cars, so that you have to use X% of recycled aluminium in new cars from a given date, what we've done on plastic. So this is on the card, this is what we've tabled, and we are quite keen to hear what everyone will say about it, if this is the right approach. But I think this is one of the most tangible contribution to making sure that indeed the future aluminium used in electric vehicles comes from recycled materials to the greatest extent possible.
Okay. And okay, so basically recycled, 100% sure, like we need more, and we need also, you know, to bridge this gap between the raw material sector on one hand and the automotive on one other. But my question would also be, because we will keep needing, for instance, aluminium and aluminium alloys, the new production of this alloy moving forward, because also the life of a car, as we know, is quite long. So we cannot just expect to recycle right away. So how can we, my question would be, do the CRMA in that sense and the end-of-life vehicles complement each other? And if there's any additional element that you believe should be incorporated to strengthen this link?
Well, I think the way that we see that the ELV regulation is the tool to reach the objective of the CRM Act on critical raw materials. So, and that's we've discussed about aluminium alloys, but we also have the rare earth materials in electric vehicle motors, where we also have some provision in the CRM Act which are so in a way taken on board in the ELV regulation. So I mean, this is the way we see it. I mean, this is a combined effort. But what we are trying to do is when we regulate a given product, which is vehicles, then we are getting much more into detail as to how you can reach the objective of the CRM Act, which is much more all-encompassing, so to say.
Would any of you would like to comment as well?
Maybe I will comment on the first part. I think it's one of the objectives of SALEMA. We can see that we can use recycled aluminium from some parts that are traditionally made with primary aluminium. And we have a nice exhibition. We can actually see the pieces which were produced. And on the other side, I think from the automotive perspective, the requirements they ask maybe there needs to be a shift in which kind of requirement are asked, because as long as we ask only, for example, a specific composition, that composition will not fit recycled aluminium, but doesn't necessarily mean that does not have certain properties. So indeed, I think it's important to see it as really like a joint effort where we are sure that we are on the same idea of wanting to recycle, which means we can ask something that recycled aluminium can have, and it's not based on composition, but it's based on mechanical properties, for example. And that goes back, for example, creating cars in a way, and that's okay for the cars of 20 years from now, but they're easy to disassemble, that they're easy to recycle afterwards. So indeed, it's not, I think, in SALEMA we see there are the possibility to do so. It's more like an extra step to be sure that we are all aligned on that.
Thank you.
Maybe one point to see end of life and relation with CRM Act. I think CRM Act, as far as I'm concerned, I think the Commission is just thinking on post-consumer end of life scrap in the recycling target. I assume that's the case. But I think we should also think on the very good functioning recycling industry. In the industry, like process recycling, post-industrial recycling, all the nice names for that we should not punish that because of end of life. So we are operating both in aluminium and in other and in magnesium with casting processes, also sheet processes. They have process recycling. So there should be a component in a way in the Act and in this that. Not punishing the industrial recycling.
Thank you, Martin. Chris?
Yeah, I was going to say Gaël mentioned that the CRM Act is almost going to be like an alarm bell now for when other pieces of legislation are made that pay attention to the critical raw materials if they're relevant and take specific measures there if they're needed. So we see that start to happen with the ELV directive, and it will be great across other pieces of legislation if raw materials can get that same strategic attention. And then, not mentioned so much so far, but on the ELV side, I think exports and how we can control the exports, you mentioned it, Giulia, is so crucial. Like the leakage of this waste, we started to say this is very valuable to Europe, which we didn't so clearly before. And now it is when we look at how much in all of our waste streams are leaking to less regulated regions, really crucial. So the ELV directive starts to tackle this, but really interested to see how that can be enforced and whether it can really start to keep volumes of vehicles here in Europe. That will have a massive impact on what we can recycle too.
Hopefully with the new Commission we'll have more of a horizontal overview of all this. Who knows? Now I would like to open to Q&A from the public. So if anyone has some question for our speaker, just raise your hands and Chiara will go around with the microphone. There's a question over there. Please introduce yourself. Thank you.
Ilya Ostrovsky. This is Eurometaux GmbH, is surface treatment business units of BASF Coatings division. And thank you. Yeah. Very good. And I have two questions. First question to European Aluminium. So about recycling of aluminum. You speak about aluminum on the end of the life of the vehicles. And this aluminum is surface treated and coated. Do you have some strategy in this field? Are you ready to say us what we should do in surface treatment and coatings to make this more friendly for recycling? This is first, and the second question to European Commission in this way, because in past we have got very good support in development on chrome-free technologies, yeah? And today we're completely chrome-free. The question if you also will give us such a support in development of recycling-friendly surface treatment and coatings. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Maybe I would say Francesca and then Gaël.
I will try to answer the question in the in the best way possible. But I think, like indeed, it will be interesting to see, and I'm not the right person to answer that, which is the kind of contamination that we have now today from the end of life scrap that is treated. And I suppose, yeah, if in the current way, for example, pyrolysis, what is the best way to have the least contamination possible, I suppose. But I'm not really the best person to answer, but I can say in the room there are quite some aluminium producers, so I will turn back to them if the best answer to that.
Gaël?
Yes, so I understood the question as how, I mean, what can be done at the EU level to improve the recycling of aluminium in practice and also looking at that from the source. Yes, this is what I've tried to explain in the sense that we are trying to get, first the design phase as well, crafted in a way which takes into account the end of life. And that means also bringing more, first the automotive sector on board. Our experience so far is that their involvement on circularity was a bit different depending on the brands, but there was some of them which is just saying, okay, we are putting a new type of vehicle on the market. We are making sure that it complies with the overall 85 recyclable objectives, but that's going to happen in 20 years' time, and we're not paying attention anymore afterwards. Some others are much more involved, but I mean, what we've tried to say is, okay, get them more involved, and there is a lot of things that is in the proposal in that respect, from the design point of view, and also from the information point of view, that the automotive sector, the OEMs, they provide more information to the dismantler recyclers as to what type of materials is used where in the cars and how, and instructions on how to dismantle it. So that's, of course, one way of doing it. The question is how practical this information would be, which is always a bit difficult to judge. And then what we have also said is on the side of the dismantlers and then shredders and sorters have some requirements as to what needs to be removed from the car before shredding, because that has a great potential for either reuse or recycling, or if you have the technology, notably post-shredder technologies, which is efficient enough to provide the quality required in terms of purity, in terms of specifications, then you can be exempted from this obligation to remove the parts and components before shredding. But we think so this is how we've been addressing the point of trying to improve the dismantling, recycling process so that you get the quality afterwards, which is sufficiently high. But that's really, we are really looking, we are really now in the debate on that with the Parliament and the Council and stakeholders. And for example, European Aluminium, they have provided some quite detailed comment on this provision. That's very welcome. I have to say, but on the more broad policy debate, I mean, that's going to be very topical for us to see if this type of proposal can make it through the Council and Parliament. And that's also why, again, I'm thinking, and that's good to hear from Chris, notably the support on the batteries example. Indeed, on the batteries, we went quite to a granular level as a EU and as an EU legislation, but because this is what we thought was the best for, and that was supported by the legislators. Now we are getting to a certain extent, it's the same kind of debate. And there is also some tendency of saying, well, the EU should not regulate everything. That's not for you to do. I mean, we know how to do it. And we'll have some of these debates. And also, I think among the industry players, this debate will also take place. So we are also looking forward to hearing the voices of the aluminium sector, for example, Eurometaux, in support of this approach, because we expect there will also be voices which are saying it's going too far. So for us, that's really an interesting time now to see where we can land on this specific point. So I'm not sure I've completely responded to your questions, but okay, that's the way we see it at this stage from our perspective.
Thank you, Gaël. And I think we still have time for at least 2 questions. So, okay, one over there. Please always introduce yourself.
Yes, hello. Philip Giro, University of Liège. I see that we've been talking about a Critical Material Act, and that's a very good thing. And the permitting issue was raised, but I look at Canada and the United States, which can be defined as mining-friendly jurisdiction, and even there, it's impossible to permit projects. So, you know, it may be difficult in Europe. So let's see. That's a good step, but I'm not that hopeful in the short term. The other point, though, is that we are a nation, or let's say a people, with a lot of potential for recycling. But one of the things that I see that is missing is to actually evaluate the resource. You know, when you're in the mining world, you're in geology, what you do is, first of all, you evaluate what is the resource at your disposal. Is there any objective or any plans to have some resource evaluation projects so we can see how many tons of aluminum or magnesium or rare earth are at our disposal in the anthroposphere, that is in the life cycle of products? Okay, I think that would be very important, because it would give us some guideline as to what's at our disposal readily. You know, thank you.
Thank you. We're going to collect maybe another couple of questions, and then we're going to respond. Let's do that. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Sylvia Propp. I'm a researcher at the Wuppertal Institute. Thank you very much for the interesting discussion. I wanted to raise a question, how you understand the importance of other R strategies besides the recycling, like reuse, remanufacturing, and these things. Francesca, you mentioned, for example, that one part of the SALEMA project was also to reduce actually the usage of magnesium and silicon. And then further on these questions, would you also fear that by putting a focus on the recycling, for example, by setting like a clear recycling target, that this might be actually beneficial in order to improve other strategies like the remanufacturing and so on? Along the R strategies.
All right, thank you. Anyone more? Or yeah, okay, one more and then we respond.
Hi, I'm Jeff Skamans from Brunel University in Innoval Technology. And a 50-year veteran of the aluminium industry now, which is quite something. The Chemetall question was interesting. I don't think it's a problem, but I really want to tackle the legislative response, because if you look at the automotive industry as a whole, it doesn't respond to gentle nudging. It doesn't respond to any nice, kind way of making it change its way of operating. It only responds to legislation. If you look at the major changes that's gone from engines being run on fossil fuels to now being driven to electricity, it's only happening because of the legislation that puts the OEMs out of business if they don't follow these directives. And that's the way the world is. So to think that they're going to do anything to change how they build their vehicles and the materials they use on a voluntary basis is nonsense. You have to legislate. That's just a gentle persuasion.
All right, so more of a comment than a question, I would say. Okay, so let's go back to the first one on the evaluation of resources. Who would like to come? Chris?
Yeah, I think it's a very important idea, and I'd love to see the 25% target of the CRM Act translated into something per material, which is really looking at where are we today and where can we go by 2030 and what needs to happen. And part of that indeed should be looking at the urban mine we have, what's there, and when these spikes will come. That's probably also important to be clear to people about what recycling can and can't do, because a lot of the scrap we know won't be coming until 2030, 2035. But until we do that granular analysis, we started to do it in a study we did, which I'll talk about later, but I think that would be very important for the European level to take on board. And the permitting point, yeah, we'll have to see. The proof will be in the pudding, and a lot of our national members hope that the EU's ambition is translatable to the member state level, but this will have complexities. But let's still be optimistic.
Thank you. Martin?
Maybe I'm also commenting on that point for a CRM Alliance point of view, because we are covering most of the critical raw materials in Europe. I think there's a lot of, as you make inventory, not also on the urban inventory, also on terms of mine waste, on tailings, on slurry. I think there's a lot of critical raw materials there, untapped, unused. And I think this processing step in the critical raw materials, so it's between extracting, processing somehow, should also trigger to make, to stimulate projects in that area.
Thanks.
Yeah, and on this first question, well, notably on assessing the amount of materials which is going for recycling, at least again on the side of the automotive sector for the ELV, I think that we have data on that one, on the millions of tons of steel, aluminium, rubber, plastics, which are generated from ELV. There are 6 million ELV which are treated in the EU today, and then you know the composition of a car from a given year, and then you can translate it into what it means in terms of materials, and then you can see how much is recycled as well. So we have some data on that, but that's just one sector, of course. And as Chris said, I mean, the critical materials are a much wider range, and I think it is indeed worth having we're looking forward to the study then. That would be my answer to this first question. I don't know if you want to go to the next question as well.
Yeah, we can go to the next question, which, if I understood correctly, was about is important to set a recycling target, is beneficial, and also are we looking at other options, for instance, the reduction, etc.
Yeah, no, exactly, and remanufacturing, reuse, etc. And yeah. I'm thinking again about what we have in the proposal on the ELV, which indeed there is a lot of also potential, and that's also in the batteries, of course, in the batteries of the reuse of batteries, second life, etc. On the legislative front and the batteries regulation, there are a number of provisions to favor that over recycling, and that's also the case for cars. There's a lot of parts and components which indeed have a second life as a spare part and can be reused and remanufactured. And again, in that perspective, in the proposal that we've tabled, we are also very much encouraging this aspect, because that's of course, as you said, this is the first priority, to reuse, remanufacture over recycling, and there's a lot of potential for that, and a lot of business case as well, because today if you want to repair your car and want to use the spare parts, often you will be offered a new spare part which is much more expensive than a used spare part, a second-hand one, which would actually be available, but well, there's no real well-organized market. So there is a market, but I think there's a potential to do much more. And this is also the provision that we have tabling on that one, on this issue in the ELV, are going in that direction. And I think just to, from DG Environment perspective, when we are also looking at what could be done in that respect, we are always trying to put this reuse, remanufacturing, and reduce as a priority, and see how we can decline it in the different sector and legislation.
All right. Anyone else would like to comment?
I'll just very short comment, because part of SALEMA is to look at how to reduce, for example, the content of magnesium and silicon. And I think, beside the specific alloys, I think there was a study behind on once you design a certain alloy, once you design a certain material, you have to keep in mind of what is available out there. And that was part, I think, a very good part of SALEMA. So it's about reducing, it's about having in mind what is available, and not just being scientists from one side and geopolitics from the other side, by trying to merge them.
All right, thanks. And maybe on the last point made by the gentleman in second row, it's true that the legislative, more legislation is needed to drive change, but also we need to focus on implementation, because what we notice on certain piece of legislation, if there's no implementation, then it's hard, and there's a revision, then it's really hard for the industry to keep up with change. Okay, as we're really conscious of time, it's already 10:15, so I would like to circle back to our speaker, and indeed, if you have other question, we can continue more informally at the coffee breaks later on. My last question to you, and please be short, would be, if you could add one thing to the current legislative framework that could help reduce, on one hand, supply risk, but also increasing circularity, what would it be? And maybe we start from Francesca.
I will be very short and I will wear my SALEMA hat. And I think it's not really legislation, but project as SALEMA has shown that how much advancement we can do. So keep financing this kind of project and keep financing projects that really involve the whole value chain.
Chris?
I'll say we need to take another step forward on export of our scrap, controlling it better. We have the principles there. We only want to ship to places that will recycle things in equivalent conditions. Let's make sure we can implement that and really define and audit what that means.
Martin?
I think we've not tackled on the financing part of the CRM Act. I think that's one of our wishes to have a kind of a security in planning, especially for industrial investors, not so much for institutional investors, but for industrial investors.
Good point. And the Commission finally, Gaël?
No, I can just repeat that. I think for us, what is important is keep circularity on top of the agenda, because that is what will be needed for implementation, for looking at the export, for looking at the strategic autonomy in the future, and for the industrial basis for the future EU policy.
Thank you so much all for your very valuable contribution, and thank you for the audience for your engagement and your question. I'll now invite everyone to the coffee break, right? Am I, yes? All right, thank you so much, and please let's provide our speaker a big round of applause.